The air smelled of damp earth and cold smoke. Frost clung to the grass along the roadside. A young American soldier stood near a captured farmhouse in western Germany in early 1945. His boots sank into mud mixed with melting snow. In front of him, a group of German women stood still. Some held children. Some clutched small bundles. Their coats were thin. Their faces were tight with fear. They did not cry. They did not speak. They watched his hands. They watched his rifle. They expected violence. They had been told to expect it. The soldier did not shout. He did not raise his weapon. He set his rifle against a wall. He pulled a mess kit from his pack. He lit a small fire. The women stared in confusion. Steam rose from boiling water. The smell of food spread into the cold air. Nothing in their lives had prepared them for this moment. By the winter of 1944 to 1945, Nazi Germany was collapsing. The Allied armies had crossed France and Belgium after the Normandy landings in June 1944. Paris had fallen in August. By September, American, British, and Canadian forces stood at Germany's western borders. The German army had suffered catastrophic losses in men, tanks, aircraft, and fuel. The Eastern Front was worse. The Red Army had destroyed entire German army groups and was pushing toward Berlin from the east. Germany faced war on two fronts with no reserves left. In December 1944, Adolf Hitler ordered a last major offensive in the west. The Ardennes Offensive, known as the Battle of the Bulge, aimed to split Allied lines and force a negotiated peace. It failed. By January 1945, the German army was exhausted. Units were understrength. Many soldiers were teenagers or elderly men. Equipment was scarce. Fuel was rationed. Air support was nearly gone. Allied air power dominated the skies. American forces regrouped quickly. By February 1945, the U.S. Army began its drive toward the Rhine River. Cities like Aachen had already fallen. Cologne would fall in March. Entire towns surrendered without resistance. Civilian populations were trapped between retreating German units and advancing Allied armies. Nazi propaganda had spent years portraying Americans as brutal monsters. Posters, radio broadcasts, and speeches warned civilians that surrender meant death, rape, and destruction. Many Germans believed this completely. Women were particularly afraid. With millions of German men dead, wounded, or captured, women now made up the majority of civilians in Western Germany. Many were refugees from the East, fleeing the Red Army. Others were local residents who had lived through years of bombing and deprivation. Food was scarce. Coal was scarce. Winter was harsh. Fear was constant. American soldiers advancing into Germany were under strict orders. Civilians were to be disarmed, questioned, and secured. Prisoners of war were to be treated according to the Geneva Convention. Looting and abuse were officially forbidden. Discipline varied by unit, but the overall policy was clear. The U.S. Army wanted order, not chaos. It wanted Germany defeated, not destroyed beyond recovery. The women who encountered American troops often did not know this. They expected revenge. They expected punishment for crimes they may not have committed. Many had lost husbands and sons. Many had endured years of Nazi control, but had little power to resist it. When American units rounded them up for processing, the women froze. Silence became their defense. From the human angle, fear defined the moment. Many German women later recalled that they expected immediate execution. They had heard stories of massacres that did not exist. Some had been warned by Nazi officials to kill themselves rather than fall into enemy hands. Mothers held their children tightly, ready to shield them. Older women stood rigid, refusing to beg. They believed dignity was all they had left. When American soldiers did not act violently, confusion replaced terror. The sight of ordinary young men, often polite and cautious, did not match the image they had been fed. Some soldiers tried to communicate using gestures. Others offered cigarettes. The most shocking moment came when food appeared. Cooking meant time. It meant safety. It meant no immediate threat. For women who had lived on turnips and thin soup, the smell of hot rations felt unreal. Fear did not vanish, but it cracked. From the tactical angle, these encounters were part of a massive logistical operation. As U.S. units advanced, they had to secure civilians quickly to prevent sabotage, disease, or panic. Women and children were often gathered in schools, barns, or farms under guard. Soldiers set up temporary kitchens because supply lines were stretched. Frontline troops sometimes cooked for themselves and nearby civilians using field stoves. Feeding civilians was not always planned, but hunger could cause unrest. Calm civilians meant safer rear areas. From the technological angle, American logistics made this possible. The U.S. Army had unmatched supply capabilities. Mobile field kitchens, canned rations, powdered coffee, and portable stoves followed the troops. The K ration and C ration were designed to feed soldiers anywhere. Compared to starving German civilians, American soldiers were well supplied. Even when rations ran low, they had more than the people they encountered. Food became an unexpected tool of control and reassurance. From the enemy perspective, German civilians were victims of their own state. The Nazi regime had lied to them until the end. It had diverted food to the military and party elites. It had suppressed news of Allied conduct in liberated areas. When American soldiers behaved with restraint, many civilians experienced a psychological shock. The enemy they feared did not act as promised. This did not erase years of war, but it changed perceptions instantly. The turning point came as American forces crossed deeper into Germany in March 1945. The capture of the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen on March 7th allowed U.S. troops to cross the Rhine intact. This accelerated the collapse. German command structures broke down. Orders stopped arriving. Units surrendered en masse. Civilians were no longer shielded by front lines. They faced Allied troops daily. In many towns, American soldiers encountered groups of women who had surrendered themselves. Some carried white cloths, others simply waited in their homes. When taken into custody, they expected the worst. Instead, they were searched, registered, and guarded. The moment food appeared often marked the emotional shift. Cooking required firewood, time, and calm. It signaled that the Americans did not expect immediate combat. Soldiers sat, helmets came off. Jokes were exchanged among themselves. The women watched closely. Numbers tell the scale. By April 1945, millions of German civilians were under Allied control in the West. The U.S. Army alone captured hundreds of thousands of prisoners of war and oversaw countless displaced persons. Food shortages were severe. Allied policy gradually shifted toward feeding civilians to prevent famine. Field kitchens expanded, emergency rations were distributed. These actions were not purely humanitarian. Starving populations could destabilize occupied zones. Specific actions mattered. Soldiers who shared food broke fear faster than orders ever could. A ladle of stew meant survival. A cup of coffee meant warmth. Children responded first. They approached soldiers cautiously. Women followed. Some cried openly when they realized they would live. Others remained silent, processing the collapse of everything they had believed. This did not mean occupation was gentle or painless. Discipline was not perfect. Crimes did occur. Fear did not disappear overnight, but the initial moment of contact set the tone. For many German women, the first American they saw was not a killer. It was a tired young man cooking a meal. The aftermath reshaped Germany. By May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was over. The country lay in ruins. Millions were dead. Cities were destroyed. Families were broken. Allied occupation began immediately. American zones focused on denazification, rebuilding infrastructure, and preventing humanitarian disaster. Feeding civilians became a priority as spring turned to summer. For the women who had frozen in fear, survival became the new task. Many would later speak of that first encounter as the moment the war truly ended for them. The realization that propaganda had lied did not bring comfort. It brought anger, grief, and shame. Trust had to be rebuilt from nothing. Strategically, Allied restraint paid off. Order was maintained. Resistance collapsed quickly. The groundwork for post-war recovery was laid. The United States emerged not only as a military victor, but as an occupying power that understood stability required more than force. The lesson was simple and heavy. War dehumanizes through fear and lies. It teaches people to expect the worst. When violence does not come, the shock can be as powerful as any weapon. A pot of boiling water in a ruined land became a symbol of survival. Not mercy, not forgiveness, survival. History remembers battles and generals. It often forgets these quiet moments. But for those women standing in the cold, watching enemy soldiers cook instead of kill, the world changed forever.